I've gained a lot of wisdom over the years, but there's one choice I truly regret: moving into a nursing home. At the time, it seemed like the best decision. My family reassured me that I'd receive all the care and comfort I needed. I trusted them. But once I arrived, I quickly realized the reality was far from what I had envisioned. I know some of you might be considering this option, either for yourself or a loved one. Maybe it feels like the safest path, or perhaps you've been told it will make life simpler. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice the absence of life. No ticking clock, no hum of a refrigerator, no creak of floorboards under familiar footsteps. Just silence. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my knees, staring at the blank walls. This wasn't my home. My home had laughter, clutter, and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. This place smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. I didn't realize it then, but that first night was the beginning of the end. The end of me. The me I had spent 82 years becoming. The decision to move into the nursing home had seemed so logical at the time. My family had insisted. It's safer, they said. You'll have everything you need. But they didn't tell me the cost. No one did. The first thing I lost was my independence. It happened so subtly, I almost didn't notice. One day, I was deciding what to cook for dinner. The next, I was being handed a tray of food I didn't choose. I used to wake up with the sun, stretch, and take a walk around the neighborhood. Now, I woke up to the sound of a nurse's voice telling me it was time for breakfast. If I wanted to go outside, I had to ask. If I wanted to read, I had to wait for the common room to open. My life was no longer mine. It belonged to a schedule I didn't write. The second thing I lost was my family. Oh, they visited at first. My daughter came every Sunday, my grandchildren on holidays. But as the months dragged on, the visits became fewer. Life got in the way, they said. Work, school, responsibilities. I understood, but that didn't make the loneliness any easier. I'd sit in the common room, watching the door, hoping today would be the day someone remembered me. It rarely was. The third thing I lost was my purpose. At home, I had routines, watering the plants, tidying up, making my own meals. Small things, but they gave me a reason to get up in the morning. Here, there was nothing. Meals were made for me. Cleaning was done for me. Even my plants were gone. I tried to fill the hours with books and puzzles, but it wasn't the same. I felt useless. I saw it in the other residents too. People who had once been vibrant, now just sitting, staring, waiting for time to pass. The fourth thing I lost was my health. I didn't expect that. I thought I'd be taken care of, that I'd thrive with all the help available. But the opposite happened. The less I did for myself, the weaker I became. My legs, once strong enough for daily walks, now struggled to carry me to the dining room. My hands, once steady, now shook when I tried to hold a book. I watched others decline too, their bodies betraying them faster than they ever thought possible. The fifth thing I lost was my privacy. At home, I could close my door, sit in silence, and just be. Here, there was no such thing as privacy. Staff came in and out without knocking. Room checks were constant. Even using the bathroom required assistance. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was no longer a person but a patient, a name on a chart. The sixth thing I lost was the hope of leaving. I had told myself this was temporary, that if I didn't like it, I could always go back home. But home wasn't the same anymore. My house sat empty, my belongings sold or stored away. My family had moved on, and I wasn't sure I could manage on my own anymore. The longer I stayed, the harder it became to imagine leaving. The nursing home had become my world, and the life I once knew felt like a distant memory. Now, as I sit here, staring at these four walls, I can't help but wonder, was it worth it? The safety, the care, the convenience? Or did I trade too much for it? My independence, my family, my purpose, my health, my privacy, my freedom. All gone. And for what? If I could go back, I would have fought harder. I would have found another way. Because the truth is, once you move into a nursing home, life as you know it is over. And no one tells you that. Not until it's too late. The days blurred together. Morning, noon, night, it didn't matter. Time was no longer a linear thing. It was a loop A cycle of meals, medications, and meaningless activities designed to keep us busy. Bingo on Tuesdays, movie nights on Fridays, and church services on Sundays. The staff called it enrichment, but it felt more like a distraction, a way to keep us from noticing how empty our lives had become. I tried to make the best of it. I really did. I joined the book club, though the selections were dull and the discussion shallow. I attended the exercise classes, though they were more about going through the motions than actually improving our health. I even tried to befriend some of the other residents, but it was hard. Many of them were so far gone, lost in their own worlds of dementia or depression, that meaningful conversation was impossible. There was one woman, though, who stood out. Her name was Margaret, and she had been here longer than anyone else. She was in her late 80s, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She didn't mince words, and she didn't pretend to be happy about her situation. "This place is a prison," she told me one day, as we sat in the common room watching the rain streak the windows. "They just don't call it that because it sounds better on the brochures." I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laugh that comes from recognizing the truth in someone else's words. "Why do you stay?" I asked her. "If you hate it so much, why not leave?" She gave me a look that was equal parts pity and amusement. "And go where? My family sold my house years ago. My kids visit once a year, if I'm lucky. I've got nowhere else to go." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. They were too close to my own reality, too close to the fears I had been trying to ignore. I thought about my own house, sitting empty and cold, waiting for a life that would never return. I thought about my daughter, who had stopped calling as often, and my grandchildren, who were too busy with their own lives to visit. I thought about the future, stretching out before me like a long, dark tunnel with no end in sight. "There has to be a way out," I said, more to myself than to Margaret. "There has to be something better than this." She didn't answer. She just sat there, staring out the window, her face a mask of resignation. And in that moment, I realized something that terrified me. She had given up. She had accepted her fate, and she was just waiting for the end. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't. I had spent my entire life fighting, for my independence, for my family, for my dignity. I wasn't about to stop now. The next few weeks were a blur of frustration and desperation. I tried everything I could think of to improve my situation. I talked to the staff about getting more privacy, about having more control over my daily routines. They listened politely, nodding and smiling, but nothing changed. I reached out to my family, begging them to help me find a way out, but they were hesitant. "It's just not safe for you to live on your own anymore," my daughter said, her voice tinged with guilt. "We're doing this because we love you." Love. It was a word that had lost its meaning. If this was love, then I didn't want it. I even considered legal action, hiring a lawyer to help me regain control of my life. But the cost was prohibitive, and the process was slow. By the time I might have made any progress, I feared I would be too old, too weak, to enjoy it. And then, one day, something changed. It started with a letter. I found it in my mailbox, tucked between a flyer for a new medication and a newsletter from the nursing home. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and my name was written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in the same shaky handwriting. The message was short, but it hit me like a thunderbolt. "If you want to escape, meet me in the garden at midnight. Tell no one." I read it 3 times, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this a joke? A trap? Or was it the answer I had been praying for? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I had to find out. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. My mind raced with possibilities. Who had sent the letter? What did they want? And most importantly, was this my chance to escape? When the clock finally chimed 12, I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could. My roommate, an elderly woman named Edith, was snoring softly, oblivious to the world. I grabbed my robe and slippers, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would wake her. The hallway was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the walls. I moved quickly, my footsteps silent on the carpeted floor. The nursing home was eerily quiet at night, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. I passed the nurse's station, holding my breath as I peeked around the corner. The night nurse was dozing in her chair, a magazine open on her lap. I slipped past her, my pulse racing. The garden was at the back of the building, accessible through a set of double doors that were usually locked at night. But when I reached them, I found them slightly ajar, as if someone had been expecting me. I pushed them open and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The garden was small, just a patch of grass with a few benches and a couple of flower beds. But in the moonlight, it looked almost magical. The flowers glowed silver, their petals trembling in the breeze. The trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets to the night. And then I saw him. He was sitting on one of the benches, his face hidden in shadow. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair that gleamed in the moonlight. He didn't move as I approached, didn't even look up. But I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it up so I could see. It was a key, old and tarnished, with intricate designs etched into the metal. "This," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "is your way out." I stared at the key, my mind racing. "What do you mean? Where does it go?" He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "To freedom," he said, "but it won't be easy. You'll have to be brave. You'll have to be willing to risk everything." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. This was crazy, insane. And yet, it was the first real hope I had felt in months. "What do I have to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Listen carefully," he said, "because I'm only going to say this once." The plan was simple, but dangerous. The key, he explained, opened a door in the basement, a door that led to a tunnel. The tunnel ran beneath the nursing home, emerging in a wooded area a mile away. From there, I would be on my own. "But be careful," he warned. "They'll come after you. They'll do everything they can to stop you. If you're caught, they'll lock you up tighter than ever. You'll never get another chance." I nodded, my hands trembling as I took the key. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Why help me?" He smiled again, but this time there was sadness in his eyes. "Because I couldn't save myself," he said. "But maybe I can save you." And with that, he stood up and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had come. The next few days were a blur of preparation and paranoia. I gathered what little I could, a change of clothes, some food, a flashlight, and hid them in my room, waiting for the right moment. I avoided the staff, afraid they would see the guilt written on my face. I avoided the other residents, afraid they would ask too many questions. And then, finally, the night came. I waited until the nursing home was silent, until the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my bag, and crept down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. I moved quickly, my flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. The door was exactly where he said it would be, hidden behind a stack of old boxes. My hand shook as I inserted the key, turning it slowly, afraid it would break. But it didn't. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. This was it. My chance to escape. My chance to reclaim my life. I stepped into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing me whole. And as I walked, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, the walls closing in around me as I walked. The air was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could hear the sound of dripping water, the occasional scuttle of a rat, but otherwise, it was silent. I walked for what felt like hours, my legs aching, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. And then, finally, I saw it. A faint light at the end of the tunnel. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. The light grew brighter, closer, until I could see the outline of a door. I pushed it open, stepping out into the cool night air. The woods were dark and quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I looked around, disoriented, trying to get my bearings. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. A figure emerged from the tunnel, silhouetted against the light. For a moment, I thought it was the old man, coming to guide me further. But as the figure stepped closer, I realized it wasn't him. It was a nurse. She was holding a flashlight, her face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing out here?" I froze, my mind racing. How had she found me? How had she known? I just needed some air, I stammered, my voice shaking. She shook her head, her eyes filled with pity. "You can't be out here," she said. "It's not safe. Come back inside." I hesitated, my heart pounding. This was my chance, my one chance to escape. But as I looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes, I realized something. She wasn't the enemy. She was just doing her job. And so, with a heavy heart, I followed her back into the tunnel, back into the darkness. The next few days were a blur of guilt and regret. I was moved to a different room, one closer to the nurse's station. My privileges were revoked, my movements closely monitored. I was no longer trusted. But as I sat in my new room, staring at the blank walls, I realized something. I wasn't sorry. I wasn't sorry for trying. I wasn't sorry for fighting. Because even though I had failed, even though I was still trapped, I had done something I hadn't done in a long time. I had taken control of my life. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything. The days passed, each one blending into the next. I tried to keep my spirits up, to find small moments of joy in the monotony. I read books, I wrote in a journal, I even started a small garden in the courtyard. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. And then, one day, something changed. It was a small thing, really. A letter, just like the one before. But this time, it wasn't from the old man. It was from my daughter. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was short, but it filled me with hope. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you were suffering. Let's talk. Let's find a way to bring you home." Tears filled my eyes as I read the words, over and over again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A chance to reclaim my life, my independence, my freedom. And as I sat there, holding the letter in my hands, I realized something. I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Because no matter how old I was, no matter how much I had lost, I still had one thing left. Hope. And that, I realized, was enough.